right. It is Friday night, February 2, 2024. Season 8, you guys. Welcome to the Pastors Roundtable. Yeah, I'm talking to you too. Welcome to the Pastors Roundtable.
Good evening, good evening, good evening.
Good to see you both. All right. We welcome.
I was trying to get my share on, but I couldn't get it. So much for that for tonight.
Yeah, that countdown used to be a little bit longer. Yeah.
Yeah. Happy Sabbath to all, and we're just excited. Listen, it's Black History Month.
Yes, it is.
And so, in honor of Black History, I'm gonna wear a little bit about Black history.
What?
Yeah, man. This was
you have
given
a crown?
to me. Yeah, when I went to South Africa in September. Oh my goodness! Not only did they give me this, they gave me a new name, and I am just excited to be on tonight to share with my folks. My African name, I'm trying to make sure I say it right, is Sabusio. So I am excited to be here tonight sharing with you on this special month that we have celebrating our heritage.
Wow, that's all right. So Raj, what's the name mean, man? You can't give us Sabusio and not tell us what
Lord,
it
I
means.
can't even remember what it meant.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I
have it written down somewhere. I should have wrote it down in my notes here, but I will get it to you in a minute. But you go on and welcome the folks as I look this up.
Well, here I was thinking that we were doing something with our red, green, and yellow. So you really outdid yourself.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. I don't have a hat. I gotta get me a hat.
I know, right?
Steph, it is good to have you on tonight. We know that you are sitting in for our other co-host, Dr. Dion Henry, who is unable to be with us tonight, but I know he is watching and wishing us well tonight. So, Dr. Henry, wherever you are, I think he's out in California or headed out to California this evening.
Yes.
I remember.
Yeah. So we want to keep him lifted up, that God would bless him in his ministry out there on the left coast, and that God would give him traveling mercies. So we're excited about what God is doing in his ministry as he goes to and fro. But we are also excited to have Miss Stephanie Scott with us. She is part of the PRT team. You have seen her plenty of times before join us here at the Pastors Roundtable. She is the PR director for the Great South Central Conference. And again, what a delight it is to have her a part of the PRT team. So Steph, let's talk through the month of February. We got this. No, it's always, I always point the wrong direction. On this side.
On that side.
Talk us through our episodes this month. What are we looking at?
So this evening, we have an excellent program that I am so excited to, that we're presenting white church Black history. Some of you may have read a little article recently, and so that sort of spurred this conversation. So I'm extremely excited. I've been telling folks, tune in on YouTube and Facebook, share. On next week, we're going to be talking about urban evangelism, and that's going to be interesting. I know I come from an urban area, Chicago area, and there are no, and I use air quotes here, Caucasian or predominantly white churches, Adventist churches in the city of Chicago. So that's very interesting. We have a lot of urban ministry. We'll be talking about urban evangelism, urban ministry. On the third week, we're going to bring back slave food.
Hey.
That was a wonderful program that we did a couple of seasons ago. And so if you have not seen the first round of that, you may want to go back and rewatch that. But you can find that on our...
Or the second round. This is going to be a third time having slave food with us.
Our PRT website, or you can go on YouTube and you can find those episodes and rewatch those. But an excellent program, good information. So you will want to tune in on the third Friday. And then on the last Friday of Black History Month, we're going to be talking about the Office of Regional Conference Ministries, also known as ORCM. And a lot of people, I think, have an idea of what ORCM is, but on that last week, we'll be diving a little deeper into the Office of Regional Conference Ministries and its relevancy to the work of the regional conferences here in North American Division. So it's an exciting month, and we're going to not only talk about Black history, but in that we're going to do it in love, since this is the month of love. So.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, that's awesome. Well, we are so excited to have you, our audience, with us tonight. We know we're just getting started, but Stephanie, there's one more task I got to throw at you. You're sitting in Dr. Henry's seat, and Dr. Henry does this thing right about now.
Yes.
Make that appeal.
It is time. It is time. I wish I could do it the way he did it, but it is time to share. Hit the like button. If you're on YouTube, share the link. Call up a friend, text somebody. But we want everybody to come into the room, because this is a very important topic, a very interesting topic. And so we want to encourage you to do that. And maybe what you can also do is give us your name and where you're from, and that may spur people to. It may trigger some likes. Write somebody's name in and say, "Hey, view."
You go.
So we want you to join us.
All right, good stuff. Raj, listen, if people are just joining us tonight and they missed last week, talk to us real quick. Last week, what did they miss if they were not here last Friday night at Pastors Roundtable?
Wow, they missed a very interesting dynamic that we had on last week's show. We were I don't know what to tell you. We had an awesome time sharing. I'm doing something else that I should not be doing.
Yeah, I got you. He's a little distracted.
Listen. Project.
What's that?
2025. That's
the 2025.
Yeah. No. I was handling a little fire over here. Yeah, we talked about the 2025 project. It's a topic that nobody really knew about, or it's kind of undercover, but we sure did pull the covers back. And began to talk about the impact of the 2025 project, or the Project 2025, that is spearheaded and sponsored by the Heritage Foundation.
All right. So Raj, if they missed it, we used to say, well, if you missed it, you just missed it. And sorry, so sorry. But now in this digital age, if you missed it, you can go back and watch it.
Yes.
Watch the replay either on Facebook, on our Facebook page, or on our YouTube channel, or even on our website, where you can go to the PRT.live. You can go there and find all of the old shows, the old episodes, where you can rewatch and also get show notes. So we invite you to go ahead and do that. We've got some folk in the chat. We want to shout out. I see Dr. Taz is saying that you did a great job, Stephanie. Dr. Taz says you sounded just like her good pastor, Pastor Henry. Great job. Happy Sabbath to us, coming from Carlene Sinclair from Claremont, Florida. Who else do we have here? Hey, somebody in your neck of the woods, Raj.
Yeah, she came back from your neck of the woods.
Yes, she did. And we're happy to have her.
Neck of the woods. We couldn't keep her, man. We had her for a hot minute.
She never really left. Her heart was always in South Central. Man, but I'm not going to get into that right now.
That hurts. That's okay. We still love you down here, Denise. So good to have you in the PRT tonight. Who else did we miss? Let's see. Hey, we've got Rosemary Davis joining us from Virginia tonight. Happy Sabbath to you, Rosemary. We've got this little lady right here. Good night.
A good friend.
Yeah.
Good friend of PRT.
All right. Carlos Medley. Hey, we got to get Carlos on here, you guys.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk about that. All right. Hey.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes. Go right ahead.
Before you get to hey, Sister Black. Before you get to that, for those who get on YouTube, please make sure if you rewatch to put the Pastors Roundtable, because I don't know if everybody knows, but there is another Pastors Roundtable. So we want to make sure you're putting the THE. You can find the show on the Pastors Roundtable. I just wanted to emphasize that. Go ahead.
All right, all right. Well, go ahead. You started in on Karen.
Hey, Sister Karen Black, good to see you. Glad you're joining us this evening. Nice, nice to see you virtually.
Yes, indeed. And then we also
Yes.
have Pastor Joseph is joining us from
Yes.
down here in
Yes.
South Florida. Good to see you, Siam.
Yes. And he is a classmate
Yes.
of mine.
Okay.
But I guess of ours, because we were there
Yes.
pretty much the same time after your
That's
gap
right.
year.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Drummer's boy Josh. Oh, I know Josh. Hey, good evening, Josh. That's some other folk down here. If I'm seeing the picture, it's so tiny, but I think I know who that is.
All right.
One of my former members here, great young man, musician, extraordinaire with his brother and sister there. Good to see you, Josh, in the space tonight. All right, let's get to, we talked about what was on the table. Roger, are you ready to tell us who is at the table tonight? And let's get this thing going.
So when we were planning this particular show to kick off our Black History Month, we actually came across a article that was written by our guest talking about the white flight and the church, and we said, hey, that would be a good jumping off board when it comes to Black history and really dealing with the elephant in the room. This is it. So we were able to connect with the author, and we were able to connect with the author, and he actually is a professor. He is the associate professor at the Wilfrid Laurier University in Toronto, Canada. He teaches in the Department of Religion and Culture and Archaeology. He's really into that, but his passion, the research that he does focuses on the ethnicity and the identity, in the Hebrew Bible, and how interpretations of the past continue to shape identity in the present. We are in for a treat to have Dr. Kevin Burrell with us. I can't wait to get this conversation going.
Hey, well, let's not wait. Good evening, Dr. Burrell. Good to have you with us, sir. We are excited and delighted to have you with us tonight on the Pastor's Roundtable in Season 8, Episode number 5. Doc, we're going to yes, sir. We're going to give you just a minute to address our audience tonight and just give them even a little bit more depth and breadth of who you are and where you are and what you're doing before we jump into our questions. But just before we do that, we're going to ask Raj if you would just offer a quick word of prayer as we jump into this very pertinent discussion on this evening.
All right, let us pray. Father, we thank you for your love, your mercy, and your grace. Thank you for getting us through the first month of 2024. And now that we have reached the first Sabbath of the second month, the first Sabbath of Black history, the first Sabbath, we again are excited that you have given us the opportunity to gather. Now, Lord, I pray for this show. I pray for clarity. I pray for information. I pray for the presenter, the speaker. I pray, Lord, that those who are watching will gain some insight and see the glory of God today through the history eyes. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Doc, well, we're going to give you, we normally give, when preachers come on the show, we give them about 37.8 seconds because we know how they do. But Doc, just take the time. Time is yours just to greet our audience tonight, and whatever you want to share, time is yours, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, pastors. Appreciate the opportunity to be on the Pastors Roundtable. Truth be told, this week was the first I heard about it, but I took the time to do some research and look in the background. And I must say, I'm truly impressed at the depth of the program, or the depth of the subjects that you've covered on this channel. So your audience are being well fed, and so I praise God for the things that you're doing. In terms of my background, I was teaching at the what used to be the Canadian University College, now Burman University. So I taught there for about 7 years, from 2015 into 2022, when I transitioned to Wilfrid Laurier University. Prior to teaching at Burman, I pastored for a brief period in the British Columbia Conference in Canada. So that was from 2013 for about almost a 2-year period. ending in 2014. And so prior to all of that, I was in school, and then I was going through some transitions professionally. In fact, I used to, I wasn't always in the pastoral tract. I used to do some professional work. I had my own business in Toronto years ago before I decided to make the switch to pastoral. And ultimately, through the encouragement of professors and others at Berman, I went into the academic track. So much encouragement, much appreciation to those professors and others who saw, an academic, something in the academic stream in my future, and so they
Mm.
encouraged me in that direction. I took it, and the rest they say is history. So just happy to also make the transition back to Toronto area, just to be closer to family as one of the big things, among other things in terms of professional direction that I've been pursuing over the last little bit. So I teach. When I was at Burman University, taught basically everything biblically related to Old Testament, Hebrew Bible. I taught Greek in the first couple of years I was there as well, and just enjoyed. Man, I enjoy the students, enjoy the environment, enjoy just being part of that community there at Berman. While I was there, I also served as the equity, diversity, and inclusion
Mm.
professor for
Okay.
a chair for an assistant to the president. And so part of that involved just being with a lot of, engaging a lot of initiatives to
Mm.
address issues of diversity, issues of equity, in dealing not just with Black folks, but also with the indigenous communities
Mm.
around that area, because we have a very there's quite a large contingent of indigenous peoples in the surrounding areas. And so that was part of one of the things that I did while I was at Berman. On the personal level, been married, my wife and I now for 22 years. We have two lovely kids, Jonathan and Jesse, 15 and 13, and just been enjoying my family and enjoying being back around family. We've been away for
Mm.
about 14 years or so, and so it's good to make the transition back in the last couple of years. So overall, that's more or less my direction. My central interest in terms of research has had to do with understanding how the past interpretations of the past shape identities in the present,
Mm.
and that includes the idea of to be really candid. I was always intrigued about Black people's status in the ancient world. What were
Oh,
Black
wow.
people doing in the ancient world? And it's because I very early understood that um, there's a tendency to project, inferiority, tropes of slavery onto Black peoples and Black civilizations in the ancient past. And so I wanted to understand how, uh, what were Black people doing, in the ancient context? Were they significant? Were they not? And so
Mm.
forth. Because those interpretations that have come down to us have tended to denigrate Black peoples, dismiss Black histories,
Mm.
and essentially say, there was nothing significant about Black peoples. They made no contribution to history, to civilization, and so forth. So I wanted to investigate that, and so I took several years to do that and dug a little bit deeper. And I was fortunate to publish a book on the ancient Cushites in 2020. And the ancient Cushites are the indisputable Black peoples in the Bible. Of course, there were numerous other peoples of African heritage in the ancient Near Eastern biblical context. However, I decided to focus largely on the Cushites, since there was far more agreement there that they were indisputably, African peoples. And so that in part led to ultimately my appointment at Wilfrid Laurier University. That research and other tangential research into how the Hebrew Bible shaped, for example, theories of race in the 19th century, in the United States in particular, but also in the North Atlantic more generally. And so I've kind of been delving quite a bit into that kind of research, looking at just the development of racial theories, and why race came to the forefront at the time that it did, in terms of identity construction. And so I also teach courses in that in my current role at Wilfrid Laurier University. I teach a course, for example, called Liberation and Oppression, Legacies of the Bible. And I basically look at how interpretations of the Bible have led to both legacies of oppression, both liberation and oppression. Unfortunately, the course tends to focus more on the oppression part,
Wow.
but it's dealing with all the way back. We're talking about anti-Semitism in the early centuries and its expression throughout European history, dealing with Columbus and his trip and the religious motivations that led him on his journey, and the resulting, what do you call, population catastrophe that occurred thereafter in the Americas, and then the ensuing program to rebuild the population through enslavement and importing millions of African slaves in the empire building. This business of building empire. I deal with the past, going back and into the contemporary arena, kind of like a historical sweep across time, and how the Bible and particularly interpretations of the Bible has influenced these various movements, oppression, as well as liberative movements as well.
That is
Wow.
so fascinating, Kevin. I know we came across you through an article that you wrote for Spectrum magazine. It was published in December of last year. And while you're talking here, I'm grabbing the links to the article. I just grabbed the Amazon link to your book. We're going to make sure that goes up in the show notes. I just sent them to TJ, our producer there in the background, in our chat. So we're going to try to get some of those links up in the for the people who are watching live tonight. Hopefully you'll see those links pop up in the chat, both on Facebook and YouTube, on the Pastors Roundtable channel. If you're watching on those channels, some of you may be watching on some of the other channels that we don't have access to. But if you're watching on Pastors Roundtable, you'll see them come up in the chat, and I'll go ahead and throw them up on the screen. Well, Doc, let's go ahead and jump in to our topic tonight. Again, It was kind of motivated by what we read in that article that was there in Spectrum magazine. The article was entitled "The Shaking: How Should Adventism Solve Its White Flight Problem?" One phenomenon that has been pervasive for some time now, at least in North America, including Canada, and in places like Europe and Southern England, is the disappearance of white members from congregations where they were formerly predominant. Talk to us a little bit about the statistics surrounding this, some of the things that you brought out in the article, and what can you say are some of the factors that have accounted for this? I do pastor in South Florida, where we have two conferences in this area. We used to call one the white conference, and we used to call the other the black conference. You can go very far in either conference before you can find a predominantly white church. So I'm living in an area in a zone where I'm seeing this. Talk to us about how we got here. What are some of the things that account for this?
Sure. Great question. Thank you. I could go back really far, and I will, I think, in a follow-up, question here. But in terms of, first of all, what prompted the article, we had a discussion a number of years ago. The article was written probably around 2021, I believe it was, originally. And there's a longer version to it. That's just kind of truncated version that was published in Spectrum. And I just thought about reviving the discussion this year last year when I decided to publish it. But it was prompted in large part because of what was taking place on the campus of Burrell University which I attended, some time back as well. And when I attended, there was a lot less diversity, but it was beginning to shift at that particular time. And so while I was over I would say the last 10 to 15 years has been a dramatic shift in the student body at Berman. And as a consequence, part of my duty was to, as a EDI person, or DEI, as you say in the States, was to address some of those issues. And that was part of the conference. That was part of the article came out of that context. And so it just kind of delved into the history of what was happening within the Adventist Church in the British Union in particular. But I want to structure this in a much broader sense so that we kind of get so that we can see that this is not isolated to Adventism, and to kind of put this in a wider context. We have to kind of go back to the age of Christian missions. And this goes back to, well, let's just say squarely to the 19th century. This is the time of the great William Carey. He's like the late 18th century. William Carey started the missionary movement in India and parts of Asia. We have, David Livingstone in Africa, and some of these big names, missionaries. And this was the age of missionary movements. There were, calls going out to various organizations to win the lost for Christ and so forth. And so this missionary movement, which began around this period, was made possible largely by empire, meaning that we have various European countries that were competing for imperial possession across the globe. Of course, beginning with Columbus and the Spanish. The Spanish had a massive empire, stretching from North America, South America, Caribbean, all the way to the Philippines and so forth. And then others came on the scene: the British and the French, and so forth, all competing for empire. And in order to gain imperial possession, there was always conquest involved, massive conquest, and the loss of lives, obviously. But missionaries worked hand in hand for the most part with their empires, with their respective empire, to extend the imperial apparatus, to extend control over colonial entities. And so we find that Christianity became synonymous in many respects with imperial agendas, and becomes the ideological justification for empire. And so we begin to see, as empires extend and become entrenched in various places, whether it's in Africa, Asia, etc., missionaries are working hand in hand to solidify imperial control, to pacify indigenous peoples, so that there is less resistance, to educate. Most of the time, however, they're educating in the context of commerce, so that they can bring many of these new entities into the market economy that was just beginning at that moment. We have empire, we have Christianity, missions, all working together to further this agenda of the three C's, really. So it's really Christianity, civilization, and commerce, and to bring.
I'm sorry, I just want to interject. It was funny, not funny, but interesting to me that the word that you just seemed to be searching for, the word that popped into my mind was commonwealth, to bring them into and the implications even of the term in the colonial pursuit. That was, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's the preacher in him, all the alliteration of C's.
That's awesome. That's great. And so what we find in this context of Christianity being and missionaries working together with empire, all with the same ultimate purpose. Ostensibly, they were saying that we were converting these people to Christianity, bringing them into the kingdom of God. But in reality, it was disguising the fact that this was an extremely exploitative machinery, exploiting the indigenous peoples, wiping out their populations, especially with settler colonialism. Because if you understand that there are certain cultures, societies that were settled, when they were settled by Europeans, the indigenous people were wiped out. We're talking about, obviously, the United States is a perfect example, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and some of these other places. And so Christianity came in and was quite destructive in many respects. Meanwhile, missionaries are working to convert the indigenous peoples in the various places, often through draconian means. But nevertheless, it's not to discount all missions and what they were doing, but it's just to kind of, because sometimes, we tell one side of the story of the great missionary movements, how they, converted peoples and how they, brought Christianity to these dark places and so forth. But there were also another side to the coin, which often that story doesn't get told. And it implicates what we're talking about today, actually, tonight. So that's why I'm going through this a bit. And so when you look at the spread of Christianity overall, you can see that unfortunately, in the modern context, Christianity became a global religion through the apparatus of empire. It was imperial conquests that opened up opportunities for missionaries to go to places that were inaccessible previously, hostile. They couldn't just go in and convert the people. But after the empire, after the military machinery has gone through, pacify these peoples, now the missionaries could come in and do their job with less danger. Doesn't mean that they were always free from danger, but there was less danger because the hostilities for the most part had been pacified under the imperial regime. And so all of this to say that in the end, we see that a lot of these Britain, France, we can think about the scramble for Africa that began in the 1880s in earnest. It started before that, but in the 1880s, where Africa was divided between probably about almost maybe 8 or 9 European powers, Britain taking the lion's share of Africa. And so we can think about this context of just using Africa as the example here of how all the three seas came together. And Christianity, Europeans came into these places with a sense of superiority, right? Christianity is our birthright. Christianity belongs to us. We're sharing this with the indigenous people. We're civilizing them. We're Christianizing them. We're giving them, an aspect of our culture, the trappings of our culture. And so we see how Christianity ultimately resulted in the suppression, the oppression, the exploitation of these various populations and conversions. Right, they're converting people at the same time, and these powers ultimately clashed. So we talk about World War I, World War II. A lot of people think, what are the immediate causes of these things? There are all kinds of, this duke was assassinated and so forth. That may be the case, but this is part of a longer trajectory of imperial competition between these various powers that were fighting each other. You can think of the various islands of Jamaica. The Spanish had it first, then the British took it over. They managed to hold on to that, but in Haiti it was the French, and then it was this one. And you can think of these going between imperial hands because it's all about imperial possession. It's all about conquest, and so they were fighting against each other. And the world wars, in particular World War II, was so devastating because all of these imperial powers, they turned on each other and essentially, this whole business imploded and catalyzed the what we call decolonization, because it was after Britain and all of these powers were weak to the point that they were not able to hold on to their empire, to their colonies. We have these indigenous movements that started, nationalistic movements in Africa and Indonesia and various places in India under Gandhi, and these various places that are starting to throw off imperial yoke. And so in that context where empire was no longer viable, we begin to see just the massive decolonization of the various peoples across the globe. And I think this is also instructive because a lot of times people think that Christianity or colonization came to an end because through some altruistic means, and the missionaries were helping the indigenous people. No. Colonization came to an end solely and singularly because the imperial powers turned on each other. They turned on each other and devastated each other militarily. And so now and it's no coincidence at all that it's after World War II that we begin to see the rapid decolonization of various places, because indigenous people started to protest. They started to all these various movements to throw off imperial yoke. And so between the late 40s, like 1948 till the 60s, 70s, and so forth, you see these various powers being liberated and getting their independence and so forth. Otherwise, we would have seen a different landscape missionally. We would see a different landscape had these powers not turned on themselves. Missionaries would
Wow.
continue to work within these imperial contexts, would continue to operate under the auspices of empire and continue to work for the interest of empire. So sometimes we think of we don't think of the implication of what that would look like historically had the world wars, in particular World War II, not happened, and these indigenous peoples now see this window, this tiny window of opportunity to really extract themselves from imperial control. We would have a completely different landscape globally speaking right now,
Wow.
and with Christians
That's
and Christian
fascinating.
empires and Christian missionaries working hand in hand to support imperial agendas. So, but because that didn't turn out the way it did, and in fact, missionaries by and large, for the most part, actually opposed these indigenous movements, these liberative movements that were, because it was against their interests, against their
Well, and
cultural interests.
and weren't so many of them during this time, these populist movements that were atheistic in their origin. So what we saw happen at the end of the First World War in Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution, what we saw happen in Vietnam just before and through and at the end of the Second World War, moving into the Vietnam War. All of these movements were very populist movements, but tended to be anti-religion, which would have seemed in many cases to make it harder for the imperial religionist, I don't know if that's a term, to make the inroads that they had prior to that. Fascinating.
Yes, I mean, for sure, definitely. There was, these various indigenous movements express themselves differently with different powers assisting. Because if you think of Russia, I mean, they weren't large in the imperial game as the others, and so they had a vested interest in, curtailing some of these ambitions of their counterparts. So you have these entities working, against each other's interests. But the long and short of it is that these various movements that arose, they basically and eventually successfully, but of course empires change shapes, right? So it's a different form of oppression that resulted, different forms, it just different permutations of conquest of empire and different ways of controlling these peoples. But that's not the subject tonight. I'm saying all of this to kind of put things in context. So you understand that Christianity became a global religion on the backs of empire, on the backs of conquest. And so indigenous peoples who embraced Christianity, ultimately they did. But for the most part, there is also that memory of how Christianity came, of what Christianity did in these various cultural contexts. So after the World Wars, you can think of the British Empire, for example. Britain, the motherland, needed to rebuild, and so did other powers in Europe. But particularly, let's focus on Britain. And so we begin to see these, at least within a 14-year window, 1940 to 1962, Britain basically opened its door to all former colonies so immigrants come in and rebuild and so on. So after all of this happened, now we see Christians who had been indigenous peoples or peoples in the various contexts who were Christianized. They now start moving into Britain, for instance. And so we see how this encounter with the Christians from the Commonwealth with the, in this context we use Adventism. We see now how you begin to see this encounter between those who had been Christianized and were restricted to the colonies. Now they're in the motherland, so to speak, engaging with those who once brought Christianity to them. And so we start to see the conflict arising. And within this context of conflict, just drawing on the Adventist paradigm for the moment, we begin to see this conflict starting to take shape as more and more immigrants are coming in, more and more they're coming in with a different kind of Christianity, more evangelistic, and they want, as their numbers grow, they want representation in the church and so forth. And this caused a lot of conflict. And ultimately, there is, at least in the context of Adventism in the British Union, the Pearson package came in, which was an integrative package. The idea was to diversify the leadership, give these folks more more opportunities at leadership. But very quickly, once that leadership began to be shared, we see the demise, the essentially the massive exodus, what I call the displacement of the indigenous Britons that's taking place within the context of Adventism. But if you think more broadly, in the year 1900, there were 82% of Christians lived in the global north. So in Britain, in Europe, and in North America in the year 1900, 82%, and 18% were in the global south, right? So we're talking about South America, Africa, Asia, etc. 18%. If you forward to 2020, that number has shifted significantly. Now we have about 33% of Christians in the global north, mostly in the United States. And we have 67% in the global south, largely in Africa, South America, and Asia as well. So we see this.
And
This
just
it's
to be
almost like
clear, Doc, these aren't Adventist figures. This is just
no,
Christianity at large, right?
Christianity at large. Absolutely,
Wow.
exactly.
Okay.
So exactly. So so we can see how this shift is taking place globally, because now, if you think of Christianity being wielded as a weapon in the space, and now that these indigenous peoples have embraced Christianity, and they're now moving in, to the north, because prior immigration wasn't open to those from the global south. Immigration was largely another phenomena. So you can see, the great migrations that were taking place was largely Europeans moving to the west and so forth. The immigration opened up much later in the 60s and so forth, after World War II largely. And so we begin to see the encounters that's happening. And as a result of that, in part, there's clearly a relationship between the rise of Christianity in the global south and the inverse, the demise or the decrease of Christianity in the global north. There was an inverse relationship between those two. And so what's happening within Adventism is part of this larger picture. We are a subset of this larger phenomena that's actually taking place within Christianity. A lot of times Adventists, we tend to see ourselves in isolation of these larger movements, but we're not. We're part and parcel of these larger trends that's actually taking place, because Adventism also started its evangelism process during the age of colonialism, if you think about it, right? So our missionary international missionary movement started in the late 1870s, right? It's 1874, 75, and so forth. The first churches that were planted by Adventists in Guyana happened in like 1887. So we're talking about in the age of colonization, and we also, as Adventists, capitalize on those smooth roads, so to speak.
Okay, before you go any further, I have to pause here and just say, because you're giving a lot of information, so I'm just trying to stay with the history.
Sure.
I may be jumping a little bit ahead in your presentation, but what you just said triggered something for me.
Sure.
If the issue, and I'm not a pastor, so I'm gonna talk for the people. If the issue of missionary, if the goal of the missionaries is to convert folks to Adventism and to sort of bring it to kind of what we're talking about this evening, if the point is to convert the unchurched or the wildlings in the world and those individuals who are living in these foreign countries, and if that's the goal, then why do we have white flight in the church? So if there's an issue of we're trying to convert you poor, people of color who are living in the jungles of Africa, and we're going to bring Christianity to you, and then you bring it to us, and then we come to your church, and now you're leaving church. So bring that, help me understand that a little bit.
That is profound. What you just described there is just profound, because it highlights the irony, and it also accentuates the motives that were inherent in the colonial missional projects. So it's one thing to say, I'm going to go over there and convert those people to Christianity. It's another thing for those people from over there to now come over here into my cultural context, to sit in my church, to sit at my table. Do I invite them to lunch? What kind of contact? It's okay for me to have contact with them over there, but for them to come over here and for us to have fellowship, that's going to cause a lot and has caused a lot of problems. And therefore, it calls into question the motive in the first place of actually going to these places and converting these people. And what was the motive? What was the agenda? What was the goal? Because it was not to bring them into fellowship with yourselves. Because if it were, we would have a robust, thriving church context where people from all kinds of colors and backgrounds are engaging together and are working out our differences, and people are prepared to stand their ground and work on those differences together. But if and the ironic, I think the irony is even greater, because not only are folks not prepared to stand their ground and engage with others cross culturally as they come to us and come into the North Atlantic context, but many are actually, and most indeed, are leaving. Let's use Adventism. Are leaving Adventism almost on a permanent basis. They're not going elsewhere and setting up new churches. They're actually leaving that movement, right, altogether. And there are all kinds of reasons behind this. So we're just kind of touching the surface, because this is much deeper than just that. But the irony that you brought out there, Stephanie, is pointed. Is very trenchant, because if you think about what's happening, is it's okay for the missionaries to go out and convert these people, but as they come now, as immigration necessarily opens up and the doors open up and they got to come into our fellowship, it creates another something that was unplanned, unprepared for, something that was unforeseen, and it just kind of caught North Atlantic Christianity, not just Adventism, across the board, as a as an overwhelming surprise. And the thing is, again, the reason is because Christianity historically has been used as an ideology to justify oppression, to justify empire. Obviously, we'll talk about slavery in a bit and so on. But the Christianity historically has been used by European entities to justify, the conquest, you've heard of the doctrine of discovery, obviously, in the context of North America and so on, right? Christianity is front and center in all of that, as the ideology that justifies conquest, converting the indigenous people, conquering the Canaanites, and all these different biblical tropes that are being wielded to justify conquest and conversion and so on. And so this is the issue that we are actually facing, and it's coming full circle. It's kind of like coming full circle. In the 1880s, you have Adventists in North America, in Europe, going to the Caribbean, converting people who have been relatively recently, freed from slavery. We're talking about, the British freed their slaves, 1833, technically 1837, but in the 1880s, we see Christian missionaries, particularly, we're using Adventists now because we kind of came a little bit late onto the scene. Others were well ahead of us, but we came into the 1880s. We started converting these various peoples, and they embraced the Adventist message and really deeply identified with the Adventist message, and they brought that with them to England and to other places that we're in the north. And that becomes a problem, because the very evangelistic fervor that came to them, now they've reciprocated and they're bringing that to, but that becomes problematic because the culture wars and cultural conflicts create dynamics that were not foreseen. But I want to get to your.
I want to kind of add a little something to even Stephanie's point and some things that you said there. I think when we think about the colonization and the imperial movement of the European countries, and their spreading of Christianity, I think it is key to also remember that it's complicated. That there were probably lots of good, well-meaning, mission-minded people who wanted to go and simply share the gospel, right? They weren't motivated by conquest. They weren't motivated by, but the powers that gave them ships, the powers that commissioned them often were. And so, at the same period of time, while these same mission minded folk may have been what we would have called in the 1800s abolitionists, or they would have fought for the rights of the people in the areas, that white slavery and white supremacy are two different things, right? So you may have had a group of people who were fighting to free the slaves, but we're still holding on to white supremacy.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
and so this idea of okay, we're going over there to give this to them in their context where they are, and it's like it was almost a version of seemingly separate but equal, or separate but not kind of equal. But when
Yeah.
it comes face to face over here, then you had a population here in the United States and Canada, in Great Britain, where the masses of the people were not the ones signing up to be missionaries to go overseas.
That's
Those were
it.
few people who were going over, but the masses of Christian churches, they may have been sending a dollar or two, or money to finance this stuff for the poor people over there. But it wasn't necessarily a full embrace of another culture and another people to be like us. And so I think that becomes a large part of the disconnect of it being way over there as opposed to when it is now face to face and up close and personable. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I just wanted to add one piece, and mine is more of a question, and that may have been a question as well. And so I just wanted to add this little caveat. Do we care that there is white flight? Like, is it important? And maybe you can, and maybe that's the second half of our show. So if we can just stick a pin there, a lot of, because white flight, as we're talking about it in the context of church and more specifically Adventist church, is a reflection, obviously, of the greater community that we all live in. So, you can go to a neighborhood in any major city and you'll see white flight. And you can go to, you have schools that um, integrate, and then you have white flight. And so now there's sort of a counter conversation that I've recently been hearing. Like, do we want to be integrated, whether that's church, neighborhood, or school, or are we, in terms of cultural differences and more specifically African Americans, because we're in Black History Month? I'm focusing on us. Do we want, is white flight a thing? Like, we know it's a thing, but do we care? Like, instead of like, we want to move them on out.
And yeah, I definitely want to address that. I think it's definitely a really pertinent question. I want to just let's stick a pin there for a minute, please, Stephanie. I want to come back to your question. I think it's very pertinent. I just want to go back to what Pastor Paul said here, and that is highlighting the intentions of individual missionaries and even its societies with good intentions, right? And versus the structure. So this is where we separate individual intentions from structure. And that's often the case where, even the context of racism, we focus, people have good intentions. We're not individually racist, but you're part of a system. You're supporting the structure and so forth. So you become complicit within that system. So in the context of empire has an agenda, and it's to control, it is to subjugate, and ultimately to exploit. And indeed, given its full reign, empire is about displacement. It wishes, and in the end will displace the indigenous population after it has used them for its purposes. So if you think about North America 500 years ago, what North America looks like compared to what North America looked like today. If you think about the Caribbean and the millions of indigenous peoples, the Taino Indians and the Aztecs and the Incas and the Mayas in the South America and so forth. You think of these thriving civilizations, and we have studies that tell us that roughly about 80 to 85% of these people have been wiped out through colonization. We're talking about colonization. I think we don't actually understand or appreciate its extent. 12.5 using the most accepted estimate, 12.5 million Africans, people were forced migrated across the Atlantic to replace the indigenous peoples that had died, that had been killed off, essentially, whether through wars and depredations, through diseases and so forth. We had mass movements of peoples to try to replace them to be the new labor force on Christian plantations. So I'm trying to emphasize something, that on the one hand, when we think about Christianity, we tend to sanitize the past, and we can look at individual intentions, and I think it's good, and I actually appreciate that, because I do believe, as you said, rightly, Pastor Paul, that there are people who went in with good intentions to serve the Lord and thought they were doing good, and in many contexts they did do good. However, they were part of that larger system that its main purpose was subjugation, exploitation, and ultimately resulted in tremendous population destruction, and displacement. And indeed, in my estimation, now we begin to see, Africa, after extracting 12.5 million people out of Africa, then the scramble for Africa happened, where Africa was divided in, between all of these powers, and it's only because of the world wars why Africa was able to extract itself, for the most part, because we began to see settler colonialism was happening in Australia, what happened in North America started happening in Africa, and happening in other places, and had the imperial intentions, or had history worked it out so that they had more decades, more, and so forth. The world may look significantly different than it does today. Okay, so my point is try to show that it is in the context of structure that we have, and good. So it's the paradox, right? It's the paradox that we get. The paradox of good and evil. You have good intentions and some good results, but you also have the negative and the very devastating. We can talk about our own context of Black peoples. We discovered Christianity on Christian plantations, right? And for the most part, it was restricted from us because of economic reasons. Many times we couldn't. Conversion was not a thing, because it conflicted with the economic interests of the system of slavery. Later on, of course, that changed. But my point is that if we think about Christianity and how in that other setting, things not change, and through God's grace, empire came to, at least that particular expression of empire came to an end, things would have looked drastically different today. So let's pause there for a bit, and then let me go back to that question: do we care about white flight? Let's deal with the statistics. So I'm moving from the historical context more present. We saw that the British Union, and when we talk about union, we're talking about the vast. We're talking about the union, not the individual conferences. The British Union is largely now under the administration, and for a long time, several decades now, largely people of the Caribbean, then Africans, and others that have come in. And in fact, I've done seminars and stuff like this and speak to individuals who were part of the British Union. And I have a very powerful email that a gentleman sent to me from the British Union, just kind of bemoaning the very fact that, Black folks in the UK did not care, he said, about the plight of the whites. That they left, their family left, and they were, there's a lot of bitterness and anger about what happened. Basically, he's, as he said in his email, he's ashamed, he says, of what many of our white folks were saying of how the Black people came in and took over our church, and he's very bitter. Now, he personally is not very bitter, but he's saying the whole situation was, there's a lot of bitterness. But he said one of the things that struck him was the lack of care or concern that was exhibited among the immigrant groups that had come into the church about the plight of the whites. They were leaving so rapidly. It was almost like there was nothing, no real concern expressed. And I'm not suggesting it wasn't. I'm just saying this is how he expressed it to me. So the question is, and of course, let me just clarify a couple things, because sometimes, we will. Am I suggesting that immigration is the only reason why there is white flight, or is that the only reason for the decrease in church membership among whites and so on. No, I don't think so. I don't think that's the only reason, but I think it's a very significant reason. It certainly accelerates the broader. It certainly adds to the broader historical context that we just talked about. And so whenever you have immigration coming in, it becomes a serious catalyst for white flight. And a lot of times the response is denial. Sometimes people just turn the other cheek. A lot of times it's anxiety. They're anxious. And I've been in contexts personally where you can feel people, your presence cause tension because you go into a church that's kind of like, it's white, but it's not. And, they know that they're whiter trend. Especially normally it takes place in the context of the cities, right? The urban centers largely are the ones that are the first to change, to shift, because this is where people are coming to find jobs and so forth. So when they come in these new contexts, you feel this tension. And I've heard people say, don't think you guys will come and take over this church as you did there. And so I'm talking about real, tangible, palpable, angst. I'm not gonna. So there are those who will tend to dismiss. There are reasons why whites have been leaving the church. Maybe there are differences in theological issues within the Adventist system. Whites are having less kids than blacks. There's secularization, and so on. And I agree. I think all of these things are actually contributing to the problem, but that does not remove or negate the fact that immigration and diversity is a catalyst for the what we see, the demise, the displacement of whites. And I'm not suggesting that this is something that all whites have left the Adventist church or anything like that, but I'm saying within the context of the North Atlantic, we see a diminishing of and particularly in immigration centers, and this will express itself differently in different places, right? If you're in California, it's going to express itself differently than, say, if you're in Florida or if you're in New York, right, where you have more immigration coming in from various places and so forth. And so yeah, the long and short of it is that these are tangible things that are happening, and they're happening in the Canadian context and Canada in particular is a hub for immigration. So everything that happens here is relative to immigration. So the church is growing in much of Canada, but for the most part, that growth is immigrants. As someone said, it's not really growth, it's movement. And it could be right. But even in the context where there's movement, it is the immigrants that are moving the church, so to speak, in the sense of growth, in the sense of people that are coming in. And so what this causes ultimately are a lot of challenges that comes to the forefront, and we don't usually think about them, but they're there. They're under the surface a lot of times, but many times they come up, show their ugly faces beyond the surface. So beyond denialism, we have expressing itself often the leadership struggles, right? So leadership struggles where not just at the local church level, but at the conference level, at the union level, there are all kinds of struggle for leadership. And related to that, there are fiscal issues that come into the picture because where is the money usually, right? The money is usually in the hands of whom? And so if you think about an institution that's undergoing that demographic shift, you begin to see, what used to be, 10, 20 years ago, all whites graduating or so forth with a few sprinkles here and there. But now you see that shift and it's the opposite. What about the donor? What about the people who used to support the institution and so forth? So all of these things come into the picture, right? And there's often this the challenge with there's often the issue of those who are at the highest echelons of power are doing everything tooth and nail to hold on to that power, and often all kinds of underhanded things if necessary to hold on to those reins of power, because it's kind of like once you go black, you don't usually tend to go back.
Oh
because
my
you
my 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 my!
because you
Well,
don't have
well,
Listen,
well.
listen,
numbers.
listen. We're gonna put a pin right there, Doc. We're gonna take a quick break. We're gonna bring you right back. So don't go anywhere, Dr. Burrell. We're ask our audience don't go anywhere, but we're going to take just about a 2-minute break. And again, thank you for joining us here on the Pastors Roundtable on this first Sabbath in February. Our Black History series has begun in earnest tonight, Dr. Pastor Wade.
Yes, it is truly impactful. I know one of the first questions I want to ask when I get back is the context of the wider generation. So we'll get to that in a second. But if you are just joining us, you are in the heat of the battle. We are actually scratching where we itch about the Black church and the white church. This is really the crux of the matter. We normally talk about it from a very high level, but this is the undercurrent, the underbelly
Yeah, he
of
took
the
us
white and
way
Black
deep
situation.
on the historical front
Yes.
there, and I'm loving it. I am just
Because
getting
you're a history
into.
buff.
That's true. That is true. But that imperialism and the colonialism history that pulls the camera back from just looking at Adventism and looking at Christianity as a whole, as to see some of the things that we're experiencing. Listen, if you are just joining us tonight, you've joined us kind of in the middle of this great conversation that we're having with Dr. Kevin Burrell. But we want you to know that this is not the only conversation that you can get this kind of information with on the Pastors Roundtable. We have 8 whole seasons, Roger, 8 whole seasons worth of good content, excellent content, where we learn, where we dig deep. We've had some phenomenal guests over the years. Roger, very quickly, because I want to get back to our guests, but very quickly, if somebody's just joining us and they want to find out more about Pastors Roundtable, listen in on some of the other discussions that we have had with so many phenomenal guests, how can they do that?
Listen, all you need to do is go to your browser and type in the PRT.live, the PRT.live, and you will be taken to the website. There you will find did I say every um, episode we have done. Every episode is there with some show notes. You can catch up. You can re-look at some of the discussions. It is truly a treasure trove of information about the church, about you as a individual in life. It is truly a blessing that Pastors Roundtable has there for you.
Stephanie, we have had some phenomenal viewers over wow, it actually literally is years now. I was like, no, we haven't been doing this for years. But yeah, we actually have. We have a great audience, a great family at the PRT family. Some of you have heard our little plugs for the website and the support page. And some of you have begun giving and sharing some resources with us to continue to help us make the Pastors Roundtable what it is. Stephanie, what would you say to somebody who's thinking, man, I love this ministry. How can I make sure that it keeps going?
First and foremost, I would say pray. We always solicit and covet the prayers of the saints. So pray for us. But if you'd like to give, there are various ways that you can give. You can give through I think we have a Cash App. Yeah.
Do we have a Cash App?
Cash App?
Yes, we do have a Cash
We have a
App.
Cash App.
Once you go to the support page, yes.
Yeah.
Go to the support ministries, but you can find it all on our website. And so we just ask, salvation is free, but ministry costs. I'm not a pastor, but I heard that somewhere. So I'm going to throw that out there. Salvation is free, but ministry costs. And it does cost a little bit to produce these programs. And hopefully they are a blessing to you. And if you're just joining us, there's still a lot on the, for us to discuss. So share, hit the share button, hit the like button, hit the little emoji. We want to bring everybody in on this conversation. And as I shut my mouth, I'm going to say, somebody did ask a question. Are there any African Americans on the panel tonight? I am an African American, probably a 4th or 5th generation. I believe my folk came over from Africa on the transatlantic on a ship. but have been here my whole life, as have my parents and grandparents and great grandparents and great great grandparents.
Awesome.
And I, just sharing again on that question, I don't know what I'm kind of half and half. I have one side of my family that probably came over on one of those boats. Alabama, Chicago, one side of my family. Other side of my family, Grenada, Trinidad. So I've got feet in both places here.
All I can say is Trini to the bone. Anyway,
Trini to the bone. All right.
Some of you are probably watching
You're
my
not, you're not Trini to the bone,
but
because from Trinidad, you probably came from Africa and hit Trinidad too. So you
there
got
you
some
go. There
you
you
African
go. I
Trinidadian.
haven't been able to find that, but I just wanted to share at the beginning of the show. I shared about the headgear that I have that we got while I was in South Africa. The name they gave me is Sebusio, which means blessing. So I'm excited to be a blessing, hopefully tonight here on Pastor's Roundtable.
All right, we got a lot of ground to make up. We got about 20 minutes,
Yeah.
and we've gotten through, I think, 2 of our main questions. I don't know if we're going to, of the 6 that we had, but let's hurry up and bring our guest back and hop back in. Dr. Burrell, welcome back.
Doc. Listen, you have fascinated me. I was excited to see the perspective and the lens you shared in this concept of understanding empire. I would share with those of you who are familiar with the Apple TV Plus show called The Foundation. What you shared about empire was literally shown in that show. So it's interesting how you made it relative to what we're looking at. But my question is, does the younger generation make a difference in how this white flight is it that the younger generation is making an impact to how white flight happens? Does it matter, or it would be something whether it was the older generation or the younger generation? How does generation play into that factor?
It's a great question. I wouldn't necessarily say that generation has a lot to do with it. It may have something to do with it, but if you look at, I think the dynamic is there's a lot of dynamics taking place here. I'm just thinking out loud in terms of the generational issue. For the most part, when you think about those who are trying to bridge the cultural gap, young people are usually more amenable to moving cross culturally, and so maybe this is a good point to introduce the idea of multicultural or the multi-ethnic church. And we see that in terms of multi-ethnic churches, insofar as they're successful, um, it's often largely younger people that are the driving forces behind these. Older people tend to be entrenched in their cultural and traditional ways and are less likely to be, moving across, the aisle as easily. So younger people, I think, hold a lot of promise to helping to bridge that gap. However, the problem is that when it comes to the issue of integration, assimilation, it's a bad word. It's a bad word in many ways, because on the one hand, is integration the right way to go? Right? Is integration the right thing? Is it even desirable? As sociologists of religion would ask that question, and they would say, ultimately, based on the available evidence, it is not necessarily the most desirable thing, meaning the outcome of assimilation within church context isn't necessarily the best idea. That means that when it comes to using multi-ethnic church as the lens through which we're going to look at this, you will find that multi-ethnic churches, they've certainly grown we've used the United States. They've grown in the United States over the last 20 years. So roughly about 6% of churches were multi-ethnic in the 1990s, late 1990s. And so by 2018, we had about 16% of most American churches. This is broad, not Adventist. Most American churches that are now multi-ethnic. But even within those trends, there are some challenges with multi-ethnic churches, to the point that, Michael Emerson, who championed this idea of the multi-ethnic church, and others who followed his camp. Now he's kind of 20 years later, he's saying, we're not getting the kind of results that we see from even multi-ethnic churches, because in multi-ethnic churches there are a number of things that are taking place. Number one, you have the elephant still remains in the room, because most of the time the issue of race remains unaddressed. In most cases with multi-ethnic churches, it is blacks that are moving into white churches, not the other direction. So it's almost like a one-way street that's taking place. And most multi-ethnic churches will tend to mirror white churches with their theology, their praxis, and so forth. And so those who are coming in are expected to conform, and they sacrifice, whether it's the time frame. We go to church for 3 or 4 hours. This is the time frame, and so they have to sacrifice various things. So multi-ethnic churches, the most important thing, of course, is that the elephant remains in the room. They're not addressing in most cases in a direct way the inequities that still exist. And so we find that multi-ethnic churches, even those champions of multi-ethnic churches, the Michael Emersons and others, are essentially kind of saying, we need to reassess this and see what's going on here, because multi-ethnic churches, we felt that this was going to be the solution. This was when Michael Emerson published his book, Divided by Faith, in 2000. This was some of the problems he highlighted. He followed that up in 2004 with his book, United by Faith, in which the multi-ethnic church became this, promise of reconciling the racial divide in America. But unfortunately, that has not really come to fruition in the ways that they expect. So now they're going back to the drawing board and saying, and the big issue is that whites, according to Emerson and others, are not prepared to give up their privilege. They're not prepared to share leadership in any fundamental way. So most of the time, it's not to suggest that there aren't multi-ethnic churches where you have black leadership and white leadership working together, but most of the time it tends to be that, black leadership or black involvement is largely symbolic. They're the ushers, the greeters, the singers, and so forth. But in terms of the power structures, those are still held within white reign. So we have some issues there when it comes to multi-ethnic churches, and it's young people for the most part that tends to be the ones that are driving the multi-ethnic churches. The reason why multi-ethnic churches don't tend to work in immigrant contexts is because when immigrants come from the various places, they come from Jamaica, Africa, Philippines, etc. They come and they want to recreate what they had back home. Their ideal of Christianity is what it was back home. So they want to recreate little Jamaica or little whatever in that context. It's after generationally, you have some kind of cultural association, some kind of cultural similarity with those around you. That's where multi-ethnic churches tend to be more attractive to younger people, second, third generation, as opposed to those from who are more recent immigrants. But the other side of the coin is that you have the homogenous churches, right? And the issue is that homogenous churches, I'm assuming you've all read Dr. Rock's book on the regional conferences and its history, and how, and a central part of his argument is that the regional conferences are thriving largely because now you have, within a context, you have more autonomy for black folks, and within that context of autonomy and more homogeneity, you have there's more cultural vitality, there's more commitment to the cause, and the evidence is there through the economic, the social, the spiritual. All of these things are there as evidence that that the homogeneous principle tends to be the one that seems to win out. That churches or cultures, people tend to gravitate to those who look more like themselves. Even in multi-ethnic churches, how many people invite someone that doesn't look like them to dinner? You can deal with them in church, but most of the people that we invite to our tables look like us. And so these are the realities which implicates our Christianity and the power of our Christian message as we speak. Because if homogeneous churches is the ideal, or at least not the ideal necessarily, but at least the necessary. It's the one that, even as Ellen White once said, until the Lord shows us a better way, we have to make some concessions in this regard, meaning we have to kind of continue in this segregated path until the Lord shows us a better way. It's not the ideal, but it's the reality, what the social and political realities dictate for us. So if that's where we are, and the stats from the regional conferences are demonstrating that we have this kind of vitality that's taking place in the context of homogenous, more or less homogenous churches, and we have, on the other hand, not just Adventists but non-Adventists. I can think of Dougherty and a number of these religion of sociology, Kevin Dougherty, and a number of these religion of sociology scholars, Coraya, Little. A number of these sociologists are basically telling us the same thing, that most thriving congregations are happening in context of homogeneity. You can think about white nationalist movements and how Christianity is flourishing in certain spheres of nationalist movements. The problem, of course, is this. While it is okay for a Filipino church within Adventist, this is going back to Adventist context, while it's okay for a group of Filipinos to come in and say, we want to start our own church, and then a group of Africans say, we want to start our own church over here. A group of Spanish people come in and say, we want to start our own church. And so we have these various ethnic churches. When a group of white folks get together and said, we want to start our own churches, the optics all of a sudden becomes quite different.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Because of that history of racism, segregation, oppression, slavery, all of that, for white folks to say, we want to have our own church. And in fact, this has happened in many conferences where they attempt to have, whites only churches. So it usually goes like this. They'll bring in, one of the big speakers, the Net Series speakers, or, one of these folks, and they will evangelize, they will promote the program, and all, the people that's up there tells you the audience they are attracting. And ultimately, they plant churches. And they will plant churches, and the churches will be largely white to begin with, okay? But the problem is, the black folks didn't get the memo in the local surrounding areas. And it's only a matter of time once they start going into these churches, right? And I've seen this firsthand on a number of occasions where we have these trials of trying to win white folks.
That's real.
The black folks don't get the memo. They start going to the churches, and those who are in leadership at first, typically white pastors and so forth, in leadership at first, they will say, well, at first they're in leadership, but as black folks start coming in, there is this tension. And I've felt that tension having visited some of these churches myself. They basically tell you, you are not welcome here, in so many words. They don't greet you. They don't talk to you. But if someone else that's white comes in, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing that they're doing, they're trying to say this is a white church. They don't know how to tell you, we want this to be a whites only church, right? They don't know how to tell you that, but that's basically what they're trying to tell you through other means. And I'm not blaming or saying it, or I'm just trying to say that it's an issue, because on the one hand, you have other ethnic churches that can pop up and it's okay and legitimate. But if white folks say we want to have our own church over here, it becomes problematic in terms of the optics, but also in terms of long-term, they don't work, because black folks are going to go to those churches. And over time, as almost always happens, they ended up becoming largely non-white and with a black pastor or a Spanish pastor or a Filipino pastor or something like that. So these are the realities that we're being faced with. And that's one of the reasons why white folks eventually throw their hands up and say in frustration, there's no place for us here, because we can't start our own, because they're going to come over here anyways, right? And even if we're hostile to them, and still push through it and show up and smiling, happy Sabbath, but we don't really want, it's not because we hate them or anything, but because we want to have our own little cultural niche in which we can function, in which we can celebrate our own, and feel a sense of community with ourselves. But the optics don't look good, and so it becomes highly problematic. And so they throw their hands up, and after a time, there's no place for us within Adventism, because the issue as well is that once these cultures start coming in, eventually they will, as the numbers grow, they will dominate. They will overwhelm, white culture, church culture, that is, right? And so where do white folks get to express themselves, culturally? We're talking about, we want to, think about the typical Sabbath. Black folks, we tend to spend a lot of time in church, right? We go to church, we got to have potluck. After that, you got to have Bible study. You got to have, Pathfinder meeting. You got to have, name it, right? Church board and all of that. White folks, you go to church in the morning for a couple hours, and then the rest of the afternoon, you go home with your kids. You take them out in the canoe. You go riding. You go hiking. Church is until next week. We'll see you again. right?
Mm.
So culturally, you already have issues there in terms of time frame, the casual dress versus the formalities, among other things. So we have, and again, a lot of times we label these things as race, and they're not always race, but because culture and race are so intertwined, it's very difficult at times to separate the two. Right. So I'm talking about that there's real racism that we have to contend with, but there are also real cultural issues that are dividing people, that are really challenging for people to actually, accept and to get along. And so a lot of white folks are ultimately leaving through frustration, sheer frustration.
I
I
know
mean,
something, you
what
guys.
you,
Roger, I know
yeah.
this. I know we should have planned a part two for this discussion tonight.
Listen, but before we start landing the plane, Doc, you as you were sharing in this last segment here, as a conference worker, it's interesting. Most of the when the regional conferences started was geared towards African Americans, but now we have we're very diverse, very multicultural with Hispanics and Latinos and
How many
Filipinos
whites?
in within the church, within the regional conferences,
And the
and
whites?
now with and some whites, not as many, but even now I'm beginning to see, as you just shared, that the Hispanics are saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we want to have more leadership, more involvement. Kind of have our own camp meeting." And the Africans are saying that. I'm not saying it's wrong, but here again, they're finding themselves not having that connection, and then in the Black context of the conferences, when they don't feel appreciated, they sometimes go over to the white conferences or the conferences that are predominantly white, and because
State
of the
conferences,
white flight,
state,
state conferences,
state
because
conference.
of the flight of white folks and the diminishing of the white church, they accept these non-white congregations or non-white folks, and begin to give them a chance to want to the sense that one of the conferences that I know did that have totally changed from being white to being Latino. And they are now having their growing pains with that. So
Yeah.
what you shared there is having a real issue. And so one of our folks asked about what can we do to stem the issue, but I think we touched it in terms of, should we care about the issue?
Yeah. Really great. Really
Yeah,
great question.
I saw somebody in the chat said no. They said no, I don't care. I'm like, wait a minute.
I think we ought to care, personally. That's been something that I attempted to emphasize in my time when I was, DEI, involved in DEI. I tried to emphasize again that, at least in the Canadian context, we have a lot of ethnic churches, but in this case, white folks don't have that, dare I say, privilege, dare I say, the irony here is very sharp. Privilege of having their own ethnic churches. Nevertheless, that does not diminish the power struggles that I talked about earlier, and that for the most part, those at the highest reigns of power, even when the numbers are diminishing, still will hold on, tooth and nail, and sharing that power is a problem. So should we care? I think we should care. And I think we should care as a denomination. I think we should care as, administrators should care, and start thinking about constructive ways of dealing with this, not the ignoring the problem, denying the problem, the kind of leadership struggles that ensues from the problem, the kind of bitterness and anxiety and so forth. I think we need to face the problem through more than spiritual lens. The problem is, a lot of times we think of church as a spiritual institution, and it is, but it is also, and perhaps even more so a social institution. And within social institutions, there are all kinds of power dynamics that are at play. And most of the time, our spirituality just camouflages these things, just kind of brush them over. But there are power dynamics that are there, lurking under the surface, and our spirituality is often impotent to deal with them. Is often, to really make a dent into these issues. And so, the most spiritual of us don't have any real solution to the problem. So I would say that administrators need to start taking this seriously. I think it's important to take the plight, dare I say, of our white brothers and sisters seriously, and to do what can be done to see if we can stem this issue. I personally think God's community needs to be people of every color, nation, and kindred, and the willingness, I think, to work with others. Minorities tend to be more willing to work with others. It's often the other way around. That's problematic. But I'm not saying there are valid reasons for some of these issues, for white flight, for example, historically, sociologically, and culturally. So I think the conference needs to take this seriously. It needs to start looking taking more constructive, proactive steps. Rather than these little things that we do, let's not tell anybody, but let's just start to try to do a white evangelism thing and start a white church, and let's not tell anybody that's what we're doing. And when it falls apart, it's like, okay, well, we tried. There has to be more deliberate and more constructive ways of trying to do just that. Right?
Wow, I know what our month looks like, but I also know that I feel like we're still right on the surface of this thing, even though we've gotten deep into some stuff. There's a whole lot more I know that Doc is prepared to unpack, that he is equipped to unpack. But Dr. Kevin Burrell, again, thank you so very much for sharing of your time with us here tonight at the Pastors Roundtable. We would love, I'm just going to say this on behalf of my co-host, we would love to have you back
Yes.
and to go in a little bit further. If you're joining us at the end of this program, we want to direct you to two particular works of Dr. Burrell. One is an article in the December 28th edition of Spectrum magazine online. You can find that. We're going to put that in the show notes, as well as his book, which is entitled Cushites and the Hebrew Bible, Negotiating Ethnic Identity in the Past and Present, Biblical Interpretations. That's what I'm seeing there on Amazon. But we'll link those things to today's show notes as well, so that you can go and read a little bit more. If you are watching today and you know somebody who would be very interested in this, link them, tag them, send this edition of the Pastors Roundtable to them, and then our team is going to put our heads together and see what we can do to figure out how we can fit in a part two to this, because I know that there's a lot. I'm watching the comments in the chat. I'm seeing you guys are just kind of taking some bites into this thing and some chunks out of it. We want to make sure that we can follow up just a little bit more on this going forward. That's all I have today to say. Again, thank you, Dr. Burrell. We're going to ask that you, once we sign off, that you stay put for just a few seconds after the show.
No problem.
Wow. To our viewers, thank you for
Appreciate
joining
being
us.
here. Thank you so much.
Yes. I'm sorry. What you said, Dr. Burrell?
I was saying thank you for having me. I appreciate being here, and I really enjoyed our conversation today. So
Excellent. Listen, on behalf of our hosts, all of our hosts, and our team that's behind the scene, TJ, John, we just want to say thank you to our guests and now to our viewers for joining us tonight on this very intense Pastors Roundtable, as we delved into the subject of the white church and Black history, the flight of the white members, or the Caucasian members, and it was very educational tonight. And so if you want to learn more about this, you have the two resources that we spoke about. There'll be other resources placed in the show notes under the show on the PRT.live. And we look forward to connecting with you as we continue to strive to make ministry relevant,
Resourced,
and real. See you next week.
Good night, everybody.